Hi there. My PhD project, Between the Hammer and the Anvil, is an experimental investigation of non-ferrous metalworkers of Viking-age Britain and Scandinavia. The first task in the project was to build a reconstruction of a Viking-age workshop at the Year Centre at the University of York. The workshop selected for reconstruction was the one excavated at Viborg Søndersø in Denmark in 2001. This paper will present the aims behind reconstructing this particular workshop, the challenges encountered in planning and undertaking the workshop build, and the implications of these for the interpretation of the excavated building. The project itself aims to reconstruct the toolkits and skill sets of the Viking Age non-ferrous metalworkers, and there is a lot I can say about my preliminary research and work done on the metalworking. However, the purpose of this paper is to talk about the workshop building itself and the woodworking techniques that went into the reconstruction. The point of constructing this building in the context of the overall project is to recreate the environment of the non-ferrous metalworkers of the Viking Age. Through a series of targeted process experiments, my aim is to understand the social network of the workshop. I will admit that I had not initially considered the construction of the workshop building to be much more than an adjunct to the overall project methodology. That is, I needed a setting for the experimental metalwork, and as I believe in building my experiments from the ground up, I needed one that could be used for an extended period of time, and therefore one that would become a longue durée experiment in its own right. So the build process itself became an exploration of the techniques that might have been used to construct the original building, and through this revealed new insights into the praxis of the woodworkers of the early 11th century in Denmark. I will say at this point that I do not claim that the building that has been constructed is a perfect replica of the original structure, or that every detail of the carpentry is exactly the same as its Viking Age counterpart, but I do propose that by using this method and aiming to build a living working reconstruction, I can now say something about the original builders, their lifeways, and the challenges they faced. The point of reconstructing the Viborg Søndersø workshop is that it suits my purpose rather well, given that it is a realistic size for a small building project at 5 by 3 meters and was standing for about 7 years. The preservation of the organic remains was very good, and the detailed publication of the site makes it an attractive subject for further study. The construction date of the building was established by dendrochronology as the winter of 1018-1019. The workshop was used periodically in the winter months, although there were some years in its existence when it was not in use at all. Indeed, for one summer it didn't even have a roof. This, along with its proximity to a latrine and the general distribution of waste in its immediate vicinity, has led to the building's characterization as a primitive hut. The first task was to establish the actual form of the structure of the building, given that only the ground plan remained. Everything above ground would have to be interpreted. The excavation plan shows a subrectangular structure with 2 rows of post holes, indicating the use of earth-fast posts to support the east and west walls. Except, as we can see from the independently cited wattle walling, it was not actually a wall, it was a support framework for the roof. There are also these prick posts to support a ridge. This precludes the possibility that there is a truss structure supporting the roof, as there were in other Viking Age buildings such as halls and urban dwellings. Now, this is how the excavators reconstructed the design. I redrew this structure to include the kind of joints that I felt at the time were most likely to have been used to support the wall plates. The method of assembling the structure turns the usual practice of constructing timber frames through 90 degrees, as the upright posts of a timber building are normally assembled in pairs, supporting a truss that carries the weight of the roof. In this case, however, the upright timbers are erected in rows that support this wall plate, and that gives rise to a few structural idiosyncrasies. These are what I really want to talk about, as they are what makes this structure really interesting and point to the creative use of the expertise of the builders to solve particular problems. I want to draw your attention to this corner in the northeast. Nowhere on this structure is the non-pairing of the upright posts more obvious than here, where the end posts of each side of the building are not placed opposite each other. The site was excavated using a single context planning method with bulk sampling and sieving of the contexts, and it's very unlikely to have missed a post hole. Also, the wattle wall doesn't follow a straight line at the north end of the building, and the post that supports this corner has migrated south of the expected placement by about half a metre. I initially thought this might cause a structural issue for the wall plate and added in a brace to support this. The first thing to do when working on the reconstructed building was, of course, to source some timber. I'm working on this project as part of a self-funded PhD, so while the original building was built of species such as oak, alder and poplar, the situation in Britain is that obtaining that much timber in hardwoods would be expensive, so the next best option was to use a reasonably dense softwood like larch. After some negotiation with a local tree surgeon, I obtained 20 larch trees. These were thick enough to get the 15 to 20 centimetre thickness timbers that I needed. I did initially ask the tree surgeon for some specific lengths and widths of timber, but then I asked if I could also get the tops of the tree trunks to use as rafters. This resulted in the trees being delivered whole. Not to worry, by this time I had an axe capable of cutting through one of these tree trunks fairly quickly, as well as volunteers happy enough to do the cutting, with supervision of course. For the actual build itself, I was very lucky to have the help of the chap on the right of this picture, Nevin Carling. He is an experienced practitioner of traditional timber building construction, repair and conservation from New England in the US. He happened to be finishing his degree in York at the time and was more than happy to get away from his desk to do something practical, a feeling that I'm sure many craft workers who are also in academia can sympathise with. Nevin was my guide in preparing for the build process. Together we operationalised a Viking-age version of his normal practice, which has some differences to that which he is used to, given that some tools such as saws and chisels weren't available in the form he was familiar with. The result of this is that we stripped the anticipated method down to a simple toolkit consisting of several axes of different sizes, a couple of spoon bits, a plumb line, dividers and a snap line to make straight lines. As we started to work on the building, the first task was to square up the upright post timbers. The natural shape of the tree trunks gave us more wood to work with at the base, leaving some of the upper part of the trunk round. This rounded part became the base of the post, being buried in the post hole, while the squared upper part of the post could be used for the joinery to hold the wall plate. I initially envisaged the wall plate to be attached to the posts with mortise and tenon joints. I was not particularly happy with this, as there are questions as to whether mortise and tenons were in use in Britain before the Norman conquest. But when we actually came to create these joints, we also realised that mortise and tenons would be difficult to construct with the tools at hand. However, the marking method used for them would, if reversed, also work for making bridle joints, where the horizontal beams would sit in an open-ended mortise at the top of the post. One single peg could then be used to secure this by means of a hole drilled through the two timbers. This is the method used for cutting the bridle joints. They were marked out using a centre line measured with dividers, then the lines for the cut itself were marked on the timber. The spoon bit was used to drill through the wood, removing some of the material, then an axe was used to cut most of it away. The axe was also used to cut the corresponding notches in the wall plate. The rafters were then added once the main structure was in place. These were the thinner upper parts of the trees that were used for the main frame. The roof boards then sit on top of the rafters, pegged in place with ash pegs, the tops of which are covered by the overlapping boards. Having now constructed this building, and as I work towards beginning the metalworking stages of my project, I have been thinking more about the minutiae of the building process that I went through with my volunteer helpers. With the exception of Nevin, we were all novices in the traditional carpentry techniques that were used. This was rectified quickly under his supervision, so that axe work, along with the techniques of using dividers, plumb bobs and snap lines for marking straight edges and joints, became well known to those of us who were present for all or most of the build. The experience taught me that the successful joining of two or more timbers relies on the preparation of that timber. That is, the straightening or squaring of the wood by use of the marking tools to make straight lines. I think it can be shown that this level of marking would also have been necessary for building the original structure. I'm not saying that I am certain that the joints, indeed the whole design of the structure, were reconstructed exactly as they were in the Viking Age. It will never be more than informed guesswork. But I can say that there was a structure above ground. It must have carried a roof. This roof was supported by a ridge beam and wall plates. Therefore, there must have been some form of jointing to hold that load-bearing parts of that structure together. It is no stretch from there, then, to say that the timbers of the original must have been marked up and prepared to take the joints, that the trees used would have to be worked using all the skill of the woodworkers. But the building doesn't look like the well-planned and executed long halls or urban structures that we are used to seeing elsewhere. This, I believe, is where the reductive assessment of the building as a primitive hut has originated, whereas in reality it would have taken as much skill and knowledge of the process of structural woodworking as any other Viking Age building. So how is it that the builders came to put up a sub-rectangular structure with wonky walls and a design that does not conform to the norms of Viking Age building practice? Maybe they would have preferred to use paired timbers for their posts, joined by tie beams and a roof truss. This would have negated the requirements for the prick posts supporting the ridge, and in many ways made the construction of the building easier. Then there is the northeast corner. How did the post end up so far away from its expected location? Was there the intention to use paired posts, but the location of the doorway caused the posts on the east side to be moved along, either to put more support in for the middle of the roof area, or just as a lapse in measuring procedure? I have another idea as to how it came to be that this building is so strange. A strategy of construction using paired posts would have made the build easier. However, discussing this with Nevin, who is used to selecting and felling the timber he works with, it became clear that to carry it out, a woodworker would need to do the same. On our build, we did not have that luxury. We had 20 trees. It fell to us to select from these which would be the most appropriate to use for each part of the building. One particular timber gave us some trouble, the one that was used for the east wall plate. It was long enough, wide enough, and we thought would square up well to make the bridle joints easy enough to mark and cut. What we did not see until we took the bark off was that the grain was twisted. This would cause problems if we squared it, because it would move. Essentially, it would untwist itself as it seasoned, which would split it badly. We dealt with this problem by not squaring it and cutting the tenons for the bridle joints into the round sides. This was difficult to mark and not that easy to cut, but we made it work. We also decided that the thin end of this timber could go over that northeast corner as an overhang. Moreover, the beam was thin enough and the bridle joints so stable that my anticipated brace was not necessary at all. This solution filled in for the missing post and made good use of the timber available. It took a lot of adaptation and a good knowledge of the properties and seasoning of the material we were using. Now, I will again stress that I do not believe that we have created an exact replica of the original structure, but this did make me think, what if the idiosyncrasies of the structure with a moved or missing post is directly attributable to the materials used? Did the original builders discover problems with their building materials that they too were required to overcome? Did they, like Nevin, have to use every trick and technique at their disposal to turn the available materials into a standing structure? Again, I am not saying that they did exactly the same as us in terms of the structure, but that they were required to use the same process of problem solving. This then has implications for our conceptualization of the builders. I had been, I will admit, somewhat brief in my consideration of these particular Viking Age actors. Their work has been dismissed as poor, and their position in the landscape of 11th century Jutland mostly disregarded. Yet, as we can see from the skills they required to make this standing structure a reality, they must have known what they were doing, or this really would have been little more than a flimsy shack that would not then have been suitable for its intended use. But they faced challenges. I propose that the greatest of these was that they were not allowed to choose their own timber for the job. I'm very aware that I'm drawing a straight analogy between our experience and theirs, and am wary of that. But the structural solutions that can be extrapolated from the ground plan suggest very strongly that this building was not put up as the smooth execution of a pre-existing schema. Maybe it is the case that prime timber in the area was reserved for higher status buildings such as halls, ancillary domestic buildings, and maybe even in descending order until you get to the little workshop by the lakeshore, where the very same carpenters who worked on the grand buildings were asked to take a pile of timber and make a standing structure out of it. Indeed, the term we used for this timber, which I owe to Nevin, as he looked down the length of that twisted tree trying to work out how to turn it into a useful piece of lumber, is not prime. If anything, working in these conditions requires more skill, not less. But it also implies that these carpenters were not free to make their own choices, that they were directed to erect this building and provided with the materials they were expected to use. Moving forward, I will be using this structure for metalworking and hope to be able to untangle some of the unknowns that surround Viking Age non-ferrous metalworking. But in building the project from the ground up, I hope that I've been able to shed some light on the skills and life ways of the builders of this structure, a group of Viking Age craft workers who have not previously been given any credit or consideration in the analysis of this building. Thank you for listening.